Welcome to this live broadcast brought to you by Katmai National Park, the Katmai Conservancy, and Explore.org. My name is Mike Fitz, your resident naturalist with Explore.org.
Hi, and I'm Naomi Boak, the Katmai Conservancy Media Ranger with you here today.
And today we conclude a titanic Fat Bear Week. And if you're not familiar with Fat Bear Week, it's centered around a tournament of bears where you get to choose who you think is the fattest bear cam bear of 2019. And on Fat Bear Tuesday, today, is when we decide the winner. The final two contestants are Lefty and Holly, and these bears exemplify success in the bear world. They exemplify how fat is important to their survival and the richness of Katmai's ecosystem. It's a great opportunity for us to discuss and explore more about why bears get fat to survive and how they do it. So Naomi, great to speak with you again. Thanks for joining me. How can people participate in Fat Bear Week, in the final Fat Bear Week matchup?
Well, thank you for having me here with you, Mike. This is it, guys. You decide who reigns in Katmai National Park as the fattest bear. So you go to Katmai National Park and Preserve's Facebook page, and there you will see today's Fat Bear Tuesday posting with before and after pictures of both contestants. Now, unlike People Magazine, our before and after pictures are skinny than fat. And so you click on the bear of your choice, and then on a pop-up screen will come up. On that pop-up screen, you like or love that bear, and that's your vote. So get out and vote. Campaign posters in the comments are welcome. Get out there and support your favorite fattest bear. We're promoting health and fatness here.
And if you have questions on this topic for Naomi and I about bears, fat, and how fat is important to their survival, please submit those in the comments at the bottom of the page. The moderators from Explore.org will be sending those questions our way, and we'll do our best to try to answer those during the chat. Of course, I think we have, Naomi, I think we have to introduce the two final contestants in the Fat Bear Week tournament. This has been a somewhat unpredictable Fat Bear Week in a sense. And I mean, we were talking before the broadcast that I think that's what makes it fun. That means we're engaging a lot of different people with a lot of different perspectives on the bears. And we've whittled down the contestants to just two bears. Number 775 Lefty, who's a large adult male, and number 435 Holly, who's a large adult female. Do you want to introduce Holly and a bit of her life story to us?
Sure. I think this contest it's a good day for senior citizen bears because both of these bears are older. Holly is an older bear. She's probably around 23 years old, which is, for those of you who know some of our other bears, she's about the same age as Otis, who we consider our oldest boar. So for her to get this fat at this age is a pretty big accomplishment. Holly has had 3 known litters, and she's sometimes called by UCAM viewers as Supermom Holly, and that is mainly because she adopted a cub that was emancipated early during its first year, and that's such an unusual event for a young cub to a yearling to be adopted by another sow. And she raised that cub to be a very successful and charming young bear who was a competitor this year in Fat Bear Week, Bear 503. So being fat for Holly has been a great success. And I must say about Holly, when I saw her for the first time this year in June, I was shocked at how small she is. Not just skinny, but in stature, a small bear. And we just don't think about her in that way with her large girth at this time of year and her large personality. Now, are you going to tell
Yeah,
us about her competitor?
of course. You know, Holly is a beautiful bear. Her competitor maybe wouldn't win in a beauty contest, you know, head to head with Holly, but he is a unique bear in his own right, and that is number 775 Lefty. Lefty's an older adult male. He was first identified as an adult in 2004, so we don't really know how old he was. He wasn't a particularly old bear when he was identified in 2004, but he wasn't particularly young either. So, he could be, in his mid-20s right now. We don't really know. A minimum age estimate for him would be about 21 years old. He's a large adult male, though, and a weight estimate for him, could place him easily around 1,000 pounds at this time of the year. The average size for adult male bears in Katmai in midsummer is anywhere between 700 and 900 pounds, and that's beginning middle of August, long before they attain their maximum size like they do right now. And that's why we have Fat Bear Week at this time of the year, just because this is when the bears are at what I like to call peak fat. I mean, they are at their largest right now. So Lefty could be pushing that 1,000-pound mark right now. And he's a fascinating bear to watch. He's a fun bear to watch. He demonstrates every year, a profound hunger when he first comes down to Brooks Falls, and he catches many, many salmon, and he eats them very quickly. But his mannerisms are very different today from what we saw when he first arrived at Brooks Falls in 2015. Sort of before then, he was, as you know, Naomi, he was always like a fall bear. We saw him in September and October. We didn't really see him in July. And then in 2015, he came down to Brooks Falls. And clearly from his behavior, he didn't know how to fish at the waterfall. He ran around. He jumped off of the waterfall a few times trying to catch salmon. He was stealing fish from almost every bear he could. He even challenged some of the biggest adult males at the falls, and it didn't really work out well for him in those circumstances. But he quickly settled into a routine where he was able to fish the lip of the waterfall. He realized, hey, if I stand here and I'm just a little patient, I can find great success. And he's become one of the most skilled bears on the lip of Brooks Falls. So he has certainly demonstrated over the last several years the ability to adapt and learn to a changing circumstance that he encountered at Brooks Falls. So that's just some of the information on the final two contestants in this Fat Bear Week. And while you're considering your final votes and celebrate the success of these bears, I think we'd really be remiss if we didn't discuss how fat is important to the individual survival of these bears. And to understand and appreciate that aspect of their lives, Naomi, I think first maybe we need to understand how bears get fat. So what's going on in their brains and in their bodies that helps them do this?
Well, the first thing that happens in the fall is that bears go into this metabolic state called hyperphagia. And what that is that the hormone leptin, which normally tells mammals that they're full. We have leptin, and when leptin's working for us, we stop eating and we know we're full. Well, that switch gets turned off, and leptin's not working for the bears in the fall, and they do not stop eating. They feel hungry all the time, and this really helps them prepare for hibernation and getting as fat as possible. And I think one thing that you see in the behaviors of the bear in the fall is they will eat anything. It's nonstop. They're eating not only the dead and dying spawned out salmon, but they're eating lots of berries and grass. If you look at the scat of bears in the fall, it turns to purple. And that's not from salmon, that's from berries. So they're eating everything they can. The other interesting thing is about cubs. As a first-time ranger at Katmai, I noticed that the cubs this time of year get very combative and very loud, where you may hear them pestering mom a little bit for milk or try to steal their fish during the season. But in the last few weeks, those cubs were fighting with each other all the time. They were bawling, screaming at mom, wanting to have mother's milk, trying to steal her fish all the time. And I asked Ranger Michael, who is a bear biologist, is it likely that cubs go through hyperphagia as well? And he said yes, that there was no reason to believe that they don't. So the fight for food starts early.
Yeah, every bear that we see on the cams right now has to survive on its fat reserves during winter hibernation. Those young cubs that we see aren't going to be nursing in the den. So they only nurse, and we'll get to that topic in a little bit, but those cubs only nurse in the den after they're born. So during those first few weeks of life. So right now they need to attain substantial fat reserves to survive winter hibernation. And there's competition within the litter. We see that, as you mentioned, Naomi, with them growling and yelling and fighting with one another for scraps of salmon. And salmon for these bears along that point is, the most important food source for Katmai's brown bears. It provides the majority of their calories. And the reason why we can see, such fat bears at this time of the year at Brooks River is because of the abundance of salmon itself. Bears in other habitats, they don't grow as big as Katmai bears or Kodiak bears because they don't have access to, the rich, abundant sources of salmon. They have to work a lot harder to find food. And bears, like you mentioned, Naomi, can get fat on a lot of different things. They feed on berries. They can, feed on carrion. But imagine a grizzly bear in northern Montana right now. It's getting fat primarily on berries, and you have to work a lot harder to attain the same amount of calories out of a berry patch as you do, or compared to, sitting at Brooks Falls waiting for salmon to come to you. It just takes a lot longer to move through that berry patch. You have to just work harder to do it. So a bear's physiology, in late summer and fall, coupled with abundant food, allows them really to get fat. And many bears at this time of the year too have a body fat percentage that's greater than 35%. So they are quite large individuals. So that explains a bit about why, or excuse me, how they get fat, but it doesn't really explain why they get fat. How do they get fat, or why do they get fat to survive? What's happening in hibernation?
Well, hibernation, they can lose up to 30% of their body fat. They are not fully asleep when they hibernate, but they don't urinate, they don't defecate, and they don't eat. So they essentially have to eat in 6 months enough for the entire year. And because bears tend to go into hibernation, go into their dens in, say, late October, early November around here, a lot of people may think that it's because of the weather that they hibernate. And the weather, the temperatures may trigger certain changes in their bodies, but they hibernate because there's no food. And if they were to not hibernate and stay out foraging for food, they probably wouldn't survive because there's just not enough food for them to survive out here. So their job is to pack on the pounds. It's interesting, sun bears in Asia, where the climate is a lot warmer and tropical, and there's plenty of food all year round, those bears don't hibernate. And something happens to the bears so at the end of their hibernation, which is a physiological trigger that kind starts to speed up their metabolism a bit, and they kind of wake up and come out of hibernation, although their metabolism stays pretty slow for a few weeks. I guess we could liken it to being very groggy after a nap, and then gradually their metabolism comes back to normal.
And that transition is happening inside the bears right now. The transition from an active metabolism to a hibernation metabolism isn't like a light switch. It doesn't just turn on and off. It's a process that takes many weeks. And I think the bears, based on research done on bears in other areas, the bears that we see on the bear cams are probably undergoing that switch right now. Just a very slow metabolic and physiological transition to their hibernated state. And that's going to take them several weeks. And it really doesn't, they don't reach their full hibernation state until they are within their dens for several weeks. And while they're in their dens, they're consuming their fat reserves primarily. And fat is really the molecule that allows them to hibernate for so long, because it's the choice for lasting energy. Sugars are good for quick energy. Proteins are good for for a little bit more energy over longer periods of time. But fat, really, if you want sustained energy, your body really has to have fat reserves to do that. because fat, compared to a gram of carbohydrates, for instance, fat contains about double the amount of energy. And when bears are in the den, metabolizing fat really is kind of like a clean burning energy, so to speak. When you metabolize fat, it produces body heat. Of course, bears need that to stay warm inside of the den. Metabolizing fat also produces metabolic water, so that helps to keep the bears hydrated. And inside of the den, bears aren't eating, drinking, they're not urinating or defecating, so they have to have a source of water, and that happens to be their body fat. And then the final sort of byproduct of that metabolism is carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide just gets absorbed into the bloodstream and exhaled normally through the lungs. So it's not a problem to deal with that waste product. But if you were using your lean muscle tissue to sustain your hibernation physiology, you would be producing a lot of poisons, essentially, that that could eventually kill you, especially when considering you're not urinating. I mean, if a person's kidneys shut down, the bloodstream easily becomes or quickly becomes poisoned with metabolic waste, and that can become fatal in large amounts. The kidneys of bears essentially shut down in the winter because they're not urinating, but they're not using a lot of lean body mass either. So utilizing those fat reserves, sort of that more clean burning energy, allows them to stay sort of healthy in the den and preserve their muscle mass overall. And actually, Naomi, one of the questions that sort of came up in the queue is, about how female bears and male bears fatten up in different ways. Do they fatten up in different areas of the body? And I don't really think that they do fatten up in different areas of the body. It seems like they just carry fat all around them. I mean, their legs are fat, their bellies are fat, their necks are fat at this time of the year. But fat does play very different roles in the lives of the reproductive lives of male and female bears. And that was actually one of the topics that we wanted to discuss. How does fat really relate to female reproduction? And maybe we can talk about that and how it relates to Holly.
Yeah, well, bears need to get fat to survive a winter without food, but there are other reasons for bears to get fat. And a bear like 435 Holly, I think, is fat enough to do what female bears need to do, which is to get pregnant. Because female bears have a delayed implantation. They mate early in the season, and then the egg is not implanted in the bear until that sow gets fat enough. And so the health, first, the ability to get pregnant is important, and fat makes that possible. The second thing is, the fatter a sow is, the more likely her cubs are going to be bigger and healthier. And that's for a number of reasons, because if she has a lot of fat reserves, she will probably give birth a little earlier, which means her cubs will be eating more and be larger when they leave the den, which will give them a greater chance of survival. She's also more likely to have a larger litter if she's really fat and healthy. She's better able to produce milk and better able to produce the fattiest milk possible, which for bears, that milk is about 50% fat. So fat means surviving while not eating, but it also means a lot of things for female reproductive health. What about males, Mike?
Oh yeah, well, we'll talk about males in just a little bit. One more thing that I wanted to add
Okay.
about about female, reproduction and how fat is important to them, though, is why the aspect of it that I don't think that we can forget to consider this, because it's really fascinating that bears are the only mammals that can give birth and lactate while they are hibernating. So no other mammal can do this. There are a lot of mammalian hibernators, but no other mammals will give birth and lactate in the den. And that probably is an adaptation that best allows them to utilize those fat reserves, because when bear cubs are born, I mean, they're really, really small. I mean, they're only about a pound when they're born. So very small in comparison to mother. And even the smallest reproducing female bears, grizzly bears or brown bears, maybe around a 200 pounds, 250 pounds or something like that. I mean, the cubs are still like 1/200th of the size of mom. And when you talk about a bear like Holly, it could be like 1/600th of the size. So very, very small. Human babies are like an order of magnitude larger sometimes than a bear cub when they're born.
And
So that gives you
women are very aware of that, Mike.
Yes, I cannot experience that. I do not know what that is like. I can only, talk to my mother and my female friends about that. So bears, giving birth to these very tiny cubs, that really is something that allows them to utilize fat to sustain their cubs. It seems like in the den, from what I've been reading, mammalian fetuses really don't. They really can't use fatty acids to grow for whatever reason. It seems like fatty acids can't cross the placenta very easily, so fetuses have a hard time growing on those molecules. So that would mean if a mother bear had a longer gestation period, a longer pregnancy, that she would have to draw more on her protein reserves, which are at a limited supply in the wintertime. So it seems like by giving birth to very young cubs, female bears are able to best utilize their fat reserves, because once those cubs are born, their metabolism switches over and they're able to drink milk and grow very, very fat on that bear on fatty milk. And female bears can utilize their fat reserves easily to produce that milk. So it's a really sort of fascinating process that goes on in the den each winter. The den is almost like a surrogate womb in a way for these bears overall. And of course,
Mike,
we were talking.
I have a question. Oh,
Yes, go
I
ahead.
have a question for you,
Yeah.
and it relates very specifically to Holly. Holly is an older bear, 23. That's pretty old for a Brooks bear. And we haven't talked about senescence in female bears, which means senescence is when a female bear can no longer produce cubs. And I've read that some bears, female bears, can produce cubs as late as their late 20s. And so that may diminish the chance that Holly comes back with the litter. Do you know more about senescence in female bears?
Yeah, it seems like there might be a point where that happens in the lives of brown bears. I don't think most wild brown bears live to that point, though. Some of the oldest documented wild brown bears, mother brown bears, have been in their late 20s. There seems to be evidence, though, from bears in captive facilities that bears will become senescent eventually. Female bears will become senescent eventually. So maybe Holly will reach that point. We really don't know. It's too bad again that one of our legendary bears, number 410, hasn't returned in the last couple of years or so. Because the last time we saw her, she was around 30 years of age. She hadn't had a litter in several years. Of course, the only way to really tell whether they're senescent is to examine them in the lab. And we wouldn't be able to do that with wild bears, but there does seem to be some evidence that it happens. So Holly could experience that transition over the next several years or so.
I did notice that even though 410 did not have cubs or litters in the last few years, she still had a bevy of bear followers, male bear followers. So potentially she did go into estrus when she was of that late age. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think male bears would be paying much attention to her at all unless she was going through that phase during the springtime. And that actually gets us to our next topic, Naomi, about fat as it relates to male reproduction. Males don't play any role in raising offspring, but fat still is an important part of their reproductive success overall, because in the springtime, the bears don't have much to eat and they need these fat reserves to sustain them. Do you want to talk about more about male bears in the springtime?
Sure. I am going to say you might hear my partner in crime here, Brooklyn White, who is on the phone giving another interview. So we're a little busy here on Fat Bear Tuesday. So if you hear someone in the background, that is the lovely and talented Brooklyn White. So to male bears in the spring. Well, what's on the mind of male bears when they emerge from the den is female bears. And when male bears tend to emerge from the den a little earlier than female bears, uh, we noticed that around Brooks, that one of the first bears we saw was Third Chunk, who likes to visit camp very early looking for females. And when bears emerge in early spring from the den, there's not a lot of food around. They may eat grasses. There are no berries. There are no salmon. They may find a carrion, but it's tough to maintain that weight. So having the fat reserves to be able to, we're really getting interference. That's a plane up ahead.
I can still hear you well,
Male
though.
bears, okay, good. Male bears really need those fat reserves so they can go out and find females, mate with them, and most often compete with other male bears for those females. And all that takes a lot of energy. So they need those stores of fat and that energy to be able to mate, reproduce, and then live long enough to eat again.
And that is true of Lefty, the other finalist in Fat Bear Week. He has that short left ear. We don't know how he got it specifically, but it's a pretty good bet he got it in a fight with another bear. Bears, like humans, have symmetrical ear shapes. So when bears fight with one another, they often, attack the face and the neck. Sometimes parts of the ears or even whole ears can get completely ripped off. And no one witnessed how Lefty lost part of his ear, but it is quite likely it happened in the springtime, and it's quite likely it happened over the opportunity to gain access for a female who might be in estrus. And that goes for all of the male brown bears that we saw in Fat Bear Week this year. All of those adult males, when you talk about Otis, talk about 747, and I do have I was looking for an opportunity to bring in my vote for 747 Fat. He's out of the contest. We'll talk about that and maybe a bit later on, but that's what makes Fat Bear Week so much fun. But these male bears coming out of the den need those fat reserves to fuel their pursuit of mating opportunities in the springtime. Their home ranges actually sort of expand in the spring. They wander quite widely, looking to find and follow the scent of female bears. So fat is important to either sex, males and females, in the bear world itself. Naomi, I do think we have quite a few questions in our queue, and I'll try to get those in just a little bit. But to conclude, maybe the main part of our broadcast, I think Fat Bear Week this year has really been a success. It's been really wonderful and rewarding to see everybody engage and learn more about fat and how it relates to the survival of bears, and specifically Katmai's bears. I mean, bears get fat to survive, and bears are, fat bears are a conspicuous example of Katmai's healthy ecosystem. It's important, though, that we should remember that this is an exception rather than the rule. Brown bears and salmon across their range face an onslaught of threats. And the bears of Brooks River are really inspiring symbols of what a healthy ecosystem looks like. There aren't any bandages, there aren't any introductions or restorations necessary in Katmai. And how many places can we say that about? It's very, very few, especially in this world today, a place that's, that's challenged by, human mass consumption and climate change. I mean, Katmai really does offer us the opportunity to celebrate an ecosystem functioning at its full potential. I think that's what Fat Bear Week really is all about.
Yes, and I would add, we see the potential for change and how valuable this ecosystem is just by what we saw this summer, where there was an extremely mild winter where the temperatures were 15 degrees above normal. So there was very little snow melt, which gave us low river and lake levels. We had an extremely warm summer with very little rain. In a place that usually has a lot of rain. We had a week of record breaking temperatures, and that did a couple things. One is the salmon had to hide in the glacial lake, Naknek Lake, for colder temperatures to get the oxygen that they need to live and spawn. And the bears had to hide out because imagine being in 75-degree weather with a fur coat. Not very comfortable. So we see these challenges and in a lot of ways in this summer. So the value of the ecosystem and the example of that our fat bears set for what a healthy ecosystem can be is something we all need to remember, and what Fat Bear Week celebrates.
Very well put. Do you want to get to a few questions with the remaining time?
Sure.
All right. Yeah, we do have several in the queue, and I think a couple of them we might have covered, during the broadcast already. But the first one actually that's in the queue is sort of related to our conclusion about Katmai's ecosystem, being healthy and some of the challenges it faces, because we know that bears and other ecosystems are facing a lot of challenges. There's been a few articles circulating about bears in British Columbia, and one place in particular where there's pictures of starving bears. Is that, somebody's wondering if that's a major issue. It is in certain parts of the world where salmon runs are experiencing, a precipitous decline. In Katmai, thankfully, it's not. I mean, the salmon runs over the last 40 years in the Bristol Bay area have been quite large, and that really has helped to sustain not only the size and the health of individual bears, but also like the density of the population overall. I mean, Katmai has more brown bears living within its boundaries probably than all grizzly bears within the lower 48 states. So that helps to underscore just how much food is available to these animals. So if you don't have a lot of food, it's a lot harder to make a living. So like I was mentioning before, I think Katmai really serves as that baseline. This is what a healthy ecosystem currently looks like. And we can sometimes compare that to other areas and understand what we've lost and maybe what we can gain by trying to restore these other ecosystems, especially restore salmon runs that are under threat or are at historic lows, because bears aren't the only animals that feed on salmon.
Right. The bears share the bounty with the birds. We all see the gulls on the Explore cams, eagles. There's even DNA of salmon in the flora around here. So we, as some people like to say, Fat Bear Week has been brought to you by Sockeye Salmon.
Right, they are the biggest sponsors of Fat Bear Week. Absolutely. Brooks River is in Brooks Falls in particular is sort of unique. I mean, I don't know of any other place in Katmai, and perhaps no other place in the world where bears can fish for salmon at one spot for so long over the course of the summer. McNeil River Falls is very famous for for brown bears fishing for salmon, but that's a much shorter window of time for bears to find success and fish there. So Brooks Falls is really, really unique in that way. And I think, again, one more reason maybe why to celebrate it as such a special place. Speaking of the falls, Naomi, we're continuing to see salmon jumping at the falls. Somebody was wondering if that will maybe delay the bears' trip up to the mountainsides and beginning hibernation. Do you have any thoughts on that? I have some thoughts, but I'm curious to know if you have any ideas either.
Well, it's interesting. I've had conversations with one of our bear monitors about this, and everything seems to be about 2 weeks delayed. And it was, I believe, a combination of the drought and the heat, which delayed a lot of the activities for both salmon and bears this year. Normally, when the bears go off to smaller creeks and streams in August, they come back the first week in September. Um, Fishing was so easy for them in those smaller creeks, they didn't come back till mid-September. And the bear monitor has observed a lot that the bears' coats are not quite ready for hibernation. They're not as thick as they would normally be at this time. So they're about 2 weeks behind. And I must say, it it made it 2 weeks behind for us in Fat Bear Week. I don't know. I'm curious. What do you think about whether this will delay hibernation for the bears or not?
Well, I think it depends on food availability. I think that's like one of the major drivers. Weather too. Bears probably have, circadian rhythms that are tied to the amount of daylight that they experience throughout the course of the year. And some laboratory experiments, I think, may have demonstrated that to greater or lesser extent. I'd have to check, my files and my notes to be certain of that. But I think food availability is
I
probably the major
Yeah.
thing.
Well, I do know there have been studies with dogs. Keep referring back to dogs. The studies with dogs say that dogs shed not because of temperature, but because of light. So the circadian rhythm, the amount of light, is what triggers changes in coats for dogs. So it would be logical that it would be a similar thing for bears.
Yeah, and with the bears too, earlier in the chat we talked about hibernation, and you mentioned that some bears don't hibernate, and that happens. That's been documented even in Alaska too, on Kodiak Island. So a place that's out in the Pacific to the east of Katmai. The weather there, especially at low elevations, is a little bit milder than what we find in Katmai. A bear that's walking along the coast may be able to find some food throughout the year. And tracking studies of the ecology and natural history of bears denning on Kodiak Island, they found that some male brown bears will remain active all year, although they might be
Mm.
quite lethargic. I don't think they're still at that fully ramped up metabolism that they'll find in the springtime and early summer. They still kind of really start to slow down, even if they're not going into a den and hibernating in the traditional sense. And it's I think, quite possible that, before brown bears were exterminated from places like coastal California, there probably could have been bears, out and about all year, especially if there was a good acorn crop or they had a whale carcass
Right.
or something like that to feed on. We know that black bears in the parts of the southern United States will stay active all year. I actually saw in January an adult male black bear in Big Bend National Park feeding on pine nuts. So they can be active all year. I think food availability is just one of those major things that will keep them in the den or delay I should say, their entry into it.
I might add also that a good hibernation activity for our viewers might be to search through a lot of scientific journals about bears. There's so much very interesting research that has been done and is being done on bears. And I think when we all miss the bears as they move off to their dens and the explorer cams go dark, um, we can watch the Naknek River Cam, but we can also be reading journal articles about the science of bears.
Absolutely. And the journal Ursus is a great one to do. The back issues of Ursus are available free on their website. So just type in journal Ursus. It's the genus of brown and black bears. So you can find that journal pretty easily. It's a lot of great stuff on there. So about hyperphagia, Naomi, you talked about that. So when does hyperphagia occur in cubs and subadults? Is that the same time of the year as it does for adults?
It seems to be. I mean, I haven't read extensively about that, but my observations this year is that I'm seeing ravenous subadults and certainly ravenous cubs. I did post a brief video of 273's 3 cubs in a pretty vicious fight over her milk. And they continued to fight and growl in ways that I hadn't seen. 719's 2 cubs fighting a lot over mother's milk and over salmon. So I'm all the evidence that I've seen anecdotally points to hyperphagia in younger bears.
And cubs have an exceptional rate of growth during their first year of life. I mean, they're born a
Right.
pound and they go into their dens. This time of the year, some cubs are certainly close to 70 pounds. So their growth rate really never stops during the first year of their life or so. So but it does really make sense that they would start to feel the effects of hyperphagia and want to eat as much as they can in the fall, in late summer and fall, just along the same time frame as any other bear. Um, if the bears don't urinate or defecate in hibernation, where does it go? And maybe I'll try to tackle this one, Naomi.
Yeah.
Um, Bears, again, like I mentioned, they don't urinate or defecate in the den. When they go into the den, their digestive tract is pretty much empty. They don't eat right up to the point where they go into their dens. So that their metabolism, the hyperphagia, that slows down again before they enter their den. So their digestive tract is mostly empty at that time. But that doesn't mean they're not producing bodily waste. Even though using fat mostly for energy, they still utilize some lean protein reserves. They still maintain the ability to get up and move around in the den, and they do that from time to time. So bears actually have a remarkable way of staying healthy in the den that humans, placed in the same situation, do not have. Bears actually are able to recycle the waste products from protein metabolism back into their muscles. And since they're not urinating, they're able to conserve the calcium loss in their bones. And it seems like they're able to rebuild those bones continuously throughout the hibernation cycle. They will heal broken bones even in the dens. Their wounds heal in the dens. So the physiologists don't really understand these processes. They're still trying to figure that out because there are a lot of, I think, applications that could help
Yes.
human health issues. If we can figure out a lot of these tricks that bears do in the den to maintain healthy when they're basically bedridden, when they're not moving around, when they're not getting exercise, how they can maintain their bone density and muscle health. There's a lot of applications for humans in keeping ourselves healthy. And Naomi, actually, question for you as I'm looking here. Somebody is actually wondering about the scans, those 3D scans of bears that you kind of teased everybody with a few weeks ago or a couple weeks ago, right before Fat Bear Week. Somebody was actually wondering, when are you going to post the results of those scans? And so maybe could you start with what those are um, and the process of attaining those that information and what it might reveal about the animals.
Okay. Well, our survey team was out at Brooks Camp to do 3D laser scans of the buildings at Brooks. They are landmark buildings. And when they came out, they said, "Would you like us to scan the bears?" And we said we would love that. So the teams did 3D scans, all these images of 4 of our bears. And it took a team to do that. We had to figure out when those bears would be at the falls and likely to be out of the water, which is another big problem in late summer. The bears are not out of the water very much. And they have to get then has to go on for at least 16 seconds for them to get a clear image. That means the bear can't move for 16 seconds. So that again was a challenge. One of our bear monitors went with the team to make sure that the ID of the bears was correct. And so they were able to produce these 3D images of the bears, which gave them an exact volume for the bears. And then they are estimating the weights given certain percentage body fat, which we estimate to be around 35%, which you've talked about at this time of year, and a certain percent muscle and water. And so we are going to reveal the scan of a very large Brooks bear tomorrow morning. So you will see just how big a big fat Brooks bear can be.
And I'm looking forward to seeing those results. Where can people look for that? That's on the Katmai's Facebook page, correct?
Yes, it'll be on the Katmai's Facebook page, and I'm hoping later, working with Joel Cusick, who's the one who had the idea to scan the bears and who actually did the scans, that he's written a summary of exactly what he did, and that we can make that available for people, both what he writes up and the scans of all the bears that he did.
And when will the final, this is another question about Fat Bear Week, but when will the final results be posted? So when will you call the election?
The election is being called at 6 p.m. today. That's Alaska time. So that's 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern time. And I know everyone's going to be on the edge of his seat waiting for the results. So don't get too tense.
And there's still plenty of time to vote too. So if you are undecided, or if you want to change your vote, I mean, you can do that too. This isn't, again, an actual election. The Bears have no concept of what's going, just going about their business, trying to survive at Brooks. To learn more about how they survive in the world. One of the next question that's up in the queue here is actually about, for me, Naomi, of course, you can add your thoughts. Somebody is wondering, Mike, you remarked once years ago that 435 is known to get fat every year. Do you think there could be a genetic component to that in addition to her ability to access food? Both of her 2.5-year-old daughters are quite big, and 719 was big and had cubs at 5.5 years old. Certainly I think there could be a genetic component to that, to her ability to just grow big. On a population scale, that's certainly true. The bears in Katmai probably have been selected to be bigger overall, because when you're bigger, it's easier for you to gain access to food resources. It's easier for you to gain access to mating opportunities if you're a male bear. So that there could be that selection pressure on this population of bears, and they're allowed to get bigger because of the food. So, again, is it purely genetic? I don't think so. I think it also depends on the bear's individual skill and ability to find food, forage successfully, raise cubs successfully and efficiently. But yeah, I definitely do think that there's some genetic components to their overall size.
And I'll add to that, Mike, their temperament as well and their place in the hierarchy. Another bear that I like to cite as being a very successful bear is 402, who has had 7 litters and 2 sets of quads. And most brown bears have 3 litters. So that's an extraordinary success. And she manages to feed herself and produce some very big cubs. And as you can see in this picture, she teaches her cubs how to fish. I just like to cite her as a very successful female, because if she did not get fat every year, she would not have so many litters. If she didn't take care of feeding herself and feeding her cubs, she would not produce so many successful bears, like Bear 503, who Holly raised, was actually one of 402's cubs. So just wanted to mention her as an example of fat success.
Absolutely. And from some studies in captive facilities, it seems like if you're a female bear and you go into the den with less than 20% body fat, you're probably not going to be giving birth. Any fertilized eggs that you might have in your body will just be reabsorbed, so the pregnancy won't continue, and you won't give birth. So fat is, again, there seems to be the kind of like a lower limit that says, hey, you're just not ready for it. The body unconsciously makes that decision somehow. Really, no one knows how that happens, but within bears, there seems to be that lower limit to a body fat percentage, and that directly affects their reproductive success. So 402 was one of those bears that's consistently able to get fat each year. And will a bear put off hibernation? This is always a fun question to sort of speculate about. Will a bear put off hibernation until they reach a weight they feel will hold them through the winter? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think I'm just guessing on this, so I'm going to ask for your answer. I would think not. I would think that at a certain point, what's going on metabolically with the bear and how they slow down because of all these other environmental triggers, that they have to go off and den no matter what their condition at a certain point. What do you say, Mike?
Yeah, at some point, they're probably going to, begin to hibernate. Hibernation is a bear's best energy conservation strategy, but at the same time, if a bear isn't, at the point where it feels like, hey, I don't know if I'm going to make it unless I eat more food, it may stay out of its den longer. And those are bears that often end up getting into conflict with people and habitats where, people and bears coexist, or at least try to coexist. Those bears might be more likely to take risks in and around, buildings, seeking out garbage or pet food or bird feeders or whatever it happens to be. So I don't know if anyone really knows for sure if all bears are going to, if they're feeling skinny, if they're just going to stay out of the den longer. Eventually, I think they will all just say, hey, if enough is enough, I need to get into the den. Hopefully in the springtime, I'll get lucky and I'll find a source of food. But they could stay out of the den maybe just a little bit longer. Naomi, a question for you. You and I talked about some of the bears that could be included in the Fat Bear Week contest, but somebody was wondering about 856. You could maybe talk about your decision maybe to not include him in the contest.
Not because I don't like 856. He's an amazing bear, and the fact that age 20, he's still the most dominant force on the Brooks River is incredible. The reason he is not in the contest is that he wasn't around very much in the last few weeks. And so we really didn't have any fat pictures of him. He was hiding a bit. And the only time we did see him, he was in the water. And it's really hard to tell if a bear is fat enough at that point. But I must say 856 held his own, ate a lot. And I'm glad you guys are thinking about him.
Yeah, and with Fat Bear Week, as as the person who founded Fat Bear Week, I can say there's a few things that you need to consider when you're trying to decide which bears to include in the competition. We want to, the bear has to be seen in early summer and late summer, but we also have to get bears that we can take photographs of, and decent photographs of. It's pretty easy to go out to Brooks River and get a lot of crummy photos of bears. Just go out with your little point and shoot camera and just start snapping away. But they get pictures of bears that help to illustrate, their overall growth in weight gain over the summer. That could be a bit more of a difficult task. And it's especially difficult with some of those big adult males that are a bit cryptic in the fall, like 856. We don't really see him. We don't see him down at the lower river where there's where the lighting is a little bit better. He only maybe fishes at the falls for a limited amount of time, and sometimes when it's very dark and there aren't a lot of people around. So it's just it's a challenge. And then also, with Fat Bear Week too, Naomi, you wanted to include a wide variety of bears, just not the adult males, right? And if we could easily make Fat Bear Week just big fat adult male week,
right.
But but I think we wanted to include some of the other fat bears, young bears, old bears, female bears, subadult bears, all of the different types and classes of bears. Question about what bears eat in a sense. We mentioned earlier in the broadcast that bears like to eat a lot of different types of food. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was, a few weeks ago, somebody asked me in a different format, what is one of the strangest things that I've seen bears eat? And I said human feces. And I think that grossed a lot of people out. It does happen from time to time. It's not very common. So somebody's wondering, how did that come to be, and exactly did you know it was human? So, okay, first of all, it wasn't mine. Second of all, it was by deduction, that because I was in the backcountry. I was actually in Katmai National Preserve near Moraine and Funnel Creek. I was in an area where people camp. There was a spot I was walking through where a lot of people do their business. A lot of holes excavated in that area where people had buried their their human waste appropriately, but a bear comes along and digs it up, and there's no human waste there. So they do it from time to time. I don't know, it's interesting to them. I mean, we see domestic dogs eating a lot of strange things as well. And bears have a lot of parallels with domestic dogs. So that's, again, the strangest thing that I've ever seen bears eating, and a little bit of an explanation on why I know that. Naomi, what's the strangest thing you've ever seen a bear eat?
Well, it doesn't match that. I mean, I've just seen them eat berries and all kinds of grass, and every kind of zombie salmon imaginable. So of course I haven't had the extensive time to watch bears eat all those strange things. So
and maybe just we'll have time for maybe one final question. We've not been seeing a lot of the very large bears in or at the falls over the last few days. Otis was there yesterday. He was there. He sat in the far pool almost all day yesterday, having a lot of success in that area. We haven't really seen those 747, chunk, 856, down at the falls in the last week. And somebody's just wondering why. And I suspect it's probably because, at this time of the year, bears are just going to start to disperse to different areas. Maybe some of those bears might know of one final place to catch salmon in late fall, but each one of those bears, 856, 747, in particular 747, and chunk, I mean, they were really fat. They don't necessarily need a whole lot of extra to do very well through the winter and next spring. So, at some point, a bear's just going to say enough is enough. Male bears typically have the shortest denning period of any type of bear. So they usually go into the den last, and they usually emerge first, and that's especially in comparison to pregnant females who give birth in the den. They have the longest denning period, in contrast. So I don't know why they would leave. I mean, there's still a lot of food around Brooks River, but this is the time of the year where bears start to disperse away from the river, migrating towards their denning sites, or maybe one last place to try to find food. So that's my best guess on why we might haven't seen these bears.
Maybe 747's belly finally touched the ground.
Maybe. Yeah, he is titanic. He is a very, very big bear. So but it's been a great Fat Bear Week, Naomi. I would like to thank you for putting in you and Brooklyn for putting in all the work to make it a success this year. It's been really fun to watch everybody vote and argue their favorite bears platform. You still have time to vote. Again, if you haven't done it, please go to Katmai National Park's Facebook page and cast your vote. Just click on the bear you think is the fattest and give it a reaction, a like, a wow, a whatever, a laugh, whatever you want to give it. And those final votes will be counted and considered final at 6 p.m. Alaska time, 10 p.m. Eastern time today. So again, Naomi, thanks for joining me today. It's been great working with you through Fat Bear Week.
It's been great working with you this season, a real privilege. And I really want to give a shout out to my partner in working on Fat Bear Week, Brooklyn White. She has been a champ and a pleasure to work with and a real lover of bears. So together, Brooklyn and I say farewell and enjoy Fat Bear Week.
And I say the same. Yes. So have a great day, everyone. Enjoy your Fat Bear Tuesday and Fat Bear Week. My name is Mike Fitz with explore.org. I'll talk to you soon, and never stop learning.